Pnawn da pawb a chroeso cynnes i chi. I bawb sy'n ymuno â ni heddiw, Heledd Morgan dwi, rwy'n ysgogwr newid efo'r Swyddfa'r Comisiynydd Cenedlaethau'r Dyfodol Cymru. Good afternoon, everyone, and a really warm welcome to you all, everyone who's joining us here today and who's watching a recording later on today, perhaps. I'm Heledd Morgan. I'm a change maker with the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. And joining me today is Cathy Graham and Bruce Whittier, two of our independent team who's working with us at the moment on this self-reflection tool. And doing an excellent job behind the camera is Michelle. She'll be helping us to go through the PowerPoint presentation later and supporting us with technical stuff. And Beth, who's going to be using Google Hangout to answer any questions and comments that you might have. And on that note, I'm going to talk you through how today's going to go before handing over to Bruce and Cathy. If you have any comments or questions at any point, please send them through either to Google Hangout, if you have that on your screens, or by emailing me directly. And my email address is heledd, HELEDD.morgan, MORGAN, @futuregenerations.wales. And it's in the self-reflection tool, which hopefully you've all had by now and have opened up ready for this webinar today. So before I give you some background about the work and about where we've got to so far, at risk of sounding a little bit like I'm giving an Oscar speech, I'd just like to say a few thank yous first. So I'd like to say diolch yn fawr firstly to the Wales Audit Office Good Practice Exchange team for helping us to host the webinar today. It's brilliant to be working with you guys again, and we're really, really grateful. I'd also like to say a big thank you to the independent team, two of which, as I said, are here with us today, but there are 3 others as well who've been collaborating with the Commissioner's Office so far on this work. And thirdly, a really big thank you to all of you for listening in today, to your organisations for engaging in this work, and thanks so far for working with us really on this. So I'm going to give a really brief introduction to the work before handing over to Bruce and Cathy, who are going to walk you through the tool today. Basically, as Future Generations Commissioner, Sophie Howe has a duty to promote the Sustainable Development Principle, which is defined in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And for that purpose, she must monitor and assess the extent to which the wellbeing objectives set by public bodies are being met. Now, she also has powers, as most of you hopefully know, to provide advice, assistance, and carry out research. And she's been doing that since she took up post 2 years ago, helping us all to work together to meet the national wellbeing goals. So over the last couple of years, since Sophie's taken up post, we've been involving people in understanding how we both monitor how public bodies are doing, but also advise them to help them in a way that helps to drive change and enable learning as much as possible. And today is all about that. We've been working closely with the Wales Audit Office, with Welsh Government, with other regulators, with representatives of public bodies across Wales, to really think about how best we might monitor the 345 objectives set by public bodies last year. And the kind of questions I've been thinking about are, how do you find out where organisations are in their journey of cultural change? How can we support you to keep communicating, keep moving in the right direction, and to keep trying to create change? And how can we encourage a sharing of success, but also any sharings of shortcomings as well, so that we can all move forward and learn together? So whilst we could have looked at the 44 annual reports that are either already out there by your organisations or are coming out there shortly, we really wanted to get some more insight into what's really going on the ground. And this is where the experience of the independent team really comes into play. Although they have different experiences and knowledge from working in different public sector and voluntary sector organisations, it's very complementary to our work. And their proposal was all about working with you as public bodies and developing a method that really encourages self-reflection and learning. And that really appealed to Sophie as Commissioner. She wants to understand what's happening from your perspectives, rather than just that's in a glossy annual report. And as she set out in her report that she published in May, Wellbeing in Wales, The Journey So Far, we want change to happen. We expect to see it happening in public sector, but we also know that this is the first year of monitoring your wellbeing objectives. This is the first year of you trying to create change, and only the second year since the Act's been in place. So our expectation is not that you're leading the way yet as much, but we know that there are some really good nuggets of practice out there that we want to hear about, and possibly some stubborn barriers as well that you might want to tell us about. So when you're looking at this self-reflection tool, I'd like you to remember that Sophie really wants honesty, not to beat public bodies with a stick about it, but to help us, to help you direct the right support, advice and attention to you in problem solving and removing barriers. So how does this piece of work fit into our other work as an office? Well, I like to think of it as a big jigsaw, and this piece of work is quite a significant part of that jigsaw in our monitoring and assessing of progress, but also advising and assisting public bodies. I hope some of you will have seen the simple changes that were launched last week on our website. Next year, what we've learned from these self-reflection tools will feed into future iterations of that work. We're taking it directly from the ground and from what you've told us. We've also, as I said earlier, been working really closely with the Wales Audit Office, and we're coming to see some of your organisations over the coming months as they go about examining how far you've paid attention to the Sustainable Development Principle in setting and taking steps to meeting your wellbeing objectives. All of this work is connected, and as the letter you should have received yesterday sets out, there's different stages to this work, and today is just the beginning. So thanks very much for your time. I'm now going to hand over to Bruce to start taking us through the tool itself.
Okay, Pranam Dar. Bruce Dewey. So my name is Bruce Whittier. I'm the lead of the team of the independent consultants that are undertaking this work. If we can go to the next slide, please. There's, as Helen has already mentioned, there's 5 of us in total, and what we did was to put together a bespoke team of independent consultants who have experience of working across sectors and organisations. So my background is health. Cathy, who you'll hear later, her background is from Northern Ireland. We felt it was important to have an independent view of the Welsh system. We have Owen, who works primarily in the planning system. Andrew Rogers, whose background is in public health and particularly around partnership working, and is the main architect of the tool. And then lastly, Richard Newton, whose experience is in the third sector, and we're all contactable if you'd like to hear more about the wider work that we do. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So Helen has already said that we are on a journey. Actually, you're all on a journey and we're on a journey with you. And as we've been discussing this morning, actually, that journey is more of an expedition, as I understand it in many ways. But what's the destination here? What are we looking for? Because we are at the bottom of Snowdon at the moment in terms of where we're trying to get to with the Act, but we do need to be able to demonstrate progress. But equally, we're really keen that we're looking to think differently about how we do that, and for you to think differently about how you demonstrate progress to how you might have done it before. There's been guidance issued from the Future Generations Commissioner's Office about using existing reporting processes, and annual reporting processes in particular. But we know that these may not be fit for purpose for how we need to report on the Act in the future, and that's one of the things that we really need to explore through the use of the tool. So this is very much an exploratory journey that we're looking at in terms of how we report. So we're encouraging you to think differently and creatively about how reporting is taken forward. So we want to hear about your progress, because we do need to demonstrate progress with the Act, but also hear some of the challenges that demonstrating that progress, some of the challenges that you face to inform future years so that we can do things better year on year. So if I can move on to the next slide, a bit more colourful. So we know that delivery against the Act is complex. As consultants, we've worked worked with a number of organisations, some of you out there, on trying to understand the Act and understand that complexity. And we see it as it's a very, at least three-dimensional, if not more, number of dimensions that we're trying to look at the same time, which is great in terms of thinking. But when you're then asked to report progress, when you're trying to report progress in several dimensions at the same time, how do you do that? And that's what, as a tool, we've tried to embrace here. So we are asking you to look at your objectives, look through the lens of the ways of working, but also looking through other lenses around how those dimensions fit together and finding a way of reporting progress that's not simply about project reporting. So the tool that we've designed is aimed to help embrace that challenge and encourage you to discuss how to demonstrate progress in a way that is meaningful for you in that complexity. And it may not be a linear discussion or a linear presentation of how you want to report that. We can move on to the next slide. Also, we know there's 44 bodies that are come under the Act and are required to set objectives and report progress. And the perspectives that each of you come at this Act with and the wellbeing goals is going to be very different, particularly when you think about the different sectors. So how the health sector might view the cultural wellbeing goal compared to, say, the cultural sector is going to be very different, because you're going to be looking at it from very different perspectives. And what we've also tried to embrace within the tool and our longer term process is sharing of some of that difference in perspective. So the next phase after you've completed the tool is some peer learning and peer review across organisations and sectors, because in our experience we're not aware that cross-sectoral review and sharing of reporting of progress against kind of general annual reports, but the Act as well, it has taken place before. So that's something new that we want to introduce and develop with you and see where that takes us in terms of learning from different sectors. And we'll come back to that at the end. I can move to the next slide. So some specific things about the self-reflection tool. I said that Andrew Rogers is the primary architect of the tool as it stands, and that's because the background to the work that we've done is based on work that he's undertaken on developing similar tools to look at cross-sectoral delivery of social value in public sector organisations in England in relation to the Social Value Act. So the underpinning principles of the tool are based in some tested methodology that's been undertaken in England. But having said that, the tool is very much bespoke to Wales, and it's also particularly we've involved all of the sectors that are within the 44 public bodies in its development. So we've taken particular pains to make sure that we've had involvement and co-production, if you like, in the development of the tool itself. Now, having said that, it is still a developmental tool. We're not expecting it to be absolutely perfect. We're not expecting you necessarily to completely understand it at first pass. So if it does feel difficult or challenging as you're developing it, that's fine. That's what we're expecting. But what we'd like is the feedback about how we make completion of it more straightforward and practical for you, because it needs to be a useful and practical tool for you in the future. So it does require further refinement. What we also recognise is that there is diversity in the public bodies, of the 44 public bodies, that we've needed to try and embody within the tool itself. So again, if there is language in there that doesn't quite relate to your organisation or your sector, then that's fine. Feed that back to us, but also make your own interpretation of that. You've got some freedom and flexibility in terms of how you use this tool, because we're trying to cover such a broad range of organisations. So in particular, we talk about annual reports as being the primary source of information. Not all organisations might have a document that they would call an annual report, but you can interpret what an annual report might be in terms of the highest level of reporting that you might do in your organisation that demonstrates accountability to the organisation, to the public, to Welsh Government, to regulators. So there is a flexibility there to interpret how the document is completed. What we also are aware of is that some organisations may not have reported yet in terms of their main reporting. So again, for some organisations, this tool might be more formative in terms of it will help you in completing some of your reporting if you've not already done it. So think of it from that perspective. So lastly, in summary, I probably already said this, is it's meant to be a reflective document. It's a document that is helping you reflect on what you've undertaken in the 17-18 financial year, what progress you've made against your objectives. So there are no right answers. So we're not looking to mark your work. We're looking to you to tell us how well you're doing and to provide the evidence for that. So we're and particularly you'll see when you get to the tool, there are elements of scoring. The scoring is, again, for you in the future to be able to demonstrate progress for yourself rather than there being a pass mark. So nobody will be examined as a consequence of this document. So if I can move on to the next slide. So Kathy, in a moment, will be going through the tool. Just want to explain that there are basically 3 sections. So there's section 1, which is about where we are now. And that follows quite closely the journey checker that is in the guidance that's already been issued by the Future Generations Commissioner. So you need to refer back to that guidance if you're not already familiar with it in completing the tool, just to give you that understanding of where the journey checker comes from. Section 2 is about reflecting more on the 5 ways of working and how you're making progress on those in relation to the Act. In relation to your objectives, and that is purely a scoring mechanism. So we're looking for you to provide evidence for that in section 1. So we don't need to see anything other than a score in section 2, just to make that really clear. And then section 3 is kind of more of a free-form section. There's quite a lot of questions there, but it's your opportunity to tell us anything else you think we need to know in relation to progress that doesn't fit into the tool in its most straightforward sense. So then if I move on to the next slide, just some thoughts on who should complete the tool. So our expectation is that you would spend maybe half a day with a team of people who know and understand your organisation well. That might include internal stakeholders. It may include external stakeholders. It may include members of the public, and that has been suggested to us. And I would keep it as broad and open as is useful to you in being able to demonstrate yourselves to us at your best. So the people who have the best understanding of your organisation, what you've achieved and what you've delivered, are the people that you need to have in the room to be able to gather together the evidence that you need to fulfil the tool. And our estimate is that you should be able to do that within a half-day session. So with that, I shall move over to Kathy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I now have the unenviable task of trying to explain to you just how to use this tool, how to populate it. This is the first webinar. There will be an opportunity for you to reflect on the instructions that you're being given today. So please do come back to us, and I'll explain about the next steps a little bit later. But in this first section, the purpose is for you to reflect on your own objectives and your progress. If any of your objectives have changed from those set in April 2017, we really are interested to find out why they've changed and for you to provide some rationale for that. So you can do it here in this section 1, but there will be more opportunity in section 3 to give us that information. The journey checker is to enable you to maximise your contribution to the 7 wellbeing goals. So it makes sense to reflect on your progress in this manner. So what we would like you to do, in this section, we will have a table for each of your objectives. Now we know that some organisations have up to 8, so it will be just to repeat the to repeat the process for each individual objective. The first thing that we would like you to do is just tell us what the objective is and which stage in the journey you feel your progress can match against. So are you just getting started? Or perhaps you are in the process of making simple changes. So that's about doing the obvious, the low hanging fruit. And it's perhaps been tested already by others, and usually it's quite low risk. Or perhaps you're being more adventurous, you've stepped outside business as usual, and you're beginning to change how you currently do things. Or maybe you're a bit more advanced and you're owning your ambition. So initiatives are developing, you're involving other people, you're collaborating more. There's an ambitious approach in which staff are empowered to make decisions and to work across sectors. Or maybe even in this first year, you believe that you have led the way. So you may be the first to have implemented a certain initiative, and that your change is really quite transformational, requiring the reallocation of resources. So in this section, it's about what your objective is, and when we say score yourself to the right, what we mean is place some narrative in the box where you feel that your progress is at. And the row below that, we want you to provide the evidence. Now, this is not about you having to ream or to write lots and lots of information. What we just need here is perhaps a document attached, or use a web link. So the evidence that we're looking for, it's perhaps already been reported in your annual report, or there's some other supplementary information. As you reflect on the progress of individual objectives, you may realise that actually the evidence can be found in case studies that you've already shared in internal newsletters, for instance. So we're not being prescriptive about where your evidence should or could be found, but it does have to be documented somewhere within your organisation. And what you might also want to do here is consider if or how such intelligence is captured consistently. So, we really want you to really self-reflect about how you do things, and this will probably be an iterative process, especially whenever we move on to section 2. But in summary, we just want maybe a couple of sentences in the final column about where you are. Is this where you expect it to be? What more do you need to do? And is there further opportunity to discuss the pace, there is further opportunity for you to discuss the pace of your journey in section 3. So we'll be capturing that supplementary information there. So we've got the table is repeated a number of times within your guidance document, but feel free, if we haven't got enough there, to replicate that, and please do complete that for each one of your wellbeing objectives. So if we move on then to section 2, what we're also interested to know is how you're using the 5 ways of working across your organisation to meet your objectives. And we also want you to consider in this section the 7 areas of corporate change and the progress you're making there. So this can be used really as an internal marker of where you are now, and the scores that will generate from this tool can be used as a benchmark for progress year on year. But what we've really tried to do is design tools that, as well as assisting the Commissioner, it's about helping you in your journey and giving you benchmarks of how you're using the 5 ways of working and how you can improve on that. So what we would expect this section to do is also identify strengths and weaknesses, which will help guide the Commissioner as to where she needs to implement extra support. So what additional guidance and support can the Commissioner give you? And we would also expect this to support the work of Welsh Audit Office. So what we have down the left-hand column are the 5 ways of working. And across the top, we have each of your objectives now, as well as a column for the corporate areas of change. This is where we also have to ask you to do a little bit of work. You may have more than 4 objectives, in which case we would ask you to insert the additional columns, or you may have less than 4, which is absolutely fine. We have provided a formula for the scores, and apologies in advance here, there's a typo. It shouldn't be 10, it should be 5 in that column. But what we're going to do is provide some examples of section 2, completed examples, to give you an idea of how it works, and we'll get those out to you. We're aiming for the end of this week. So this is just a scoring matrix, and our scores work from 0 to 2. So 0 is no evidence. And perhaps if we move on to the next slide, because we have we've given you an example here, and there are examples for each of the 5 ways of working of the type of evidence really that you should consider. So 0 is no evidence. Half a point would be some evidence, but recognizing you still have much to do. 1 is good evidence, but with developmental needs. 1.5, good evidence, and you can demonstrate embedded practice. And 2 is you know that your evidence is an exemplar to others. What we would also expect, as you're thinking through how you're using the 5 ways of working, is that perhaps that fuels additional thinking, and you might want to go back to section 1, because you might think, oh, actually, there's things we're doing here that we haven't captured in section 1. So the process will be a little bit of an iterative process. And as I said, so on this slide, what we've got are some of the things that we would expect to give you a guideline for the different scores for long term, but in your document you've got those guidance notes for each of the 5 ways of working. If we move on to the next slide, please. So this is section 3, and this is where we have got keeping focused and maintaining the momentum. So you'll see there's quite a number of questions here, some with quite a number of parts. But what we're trying to do here is give you the opportunity to tell us about all the good things that perhaps you haven't been able to reflect on or haven't been able to capture in the previous 2 sections. It's also about maybe some of those light bulb moments you may have had during the self-reflection exercise. It gives you an opportunity to think about what more do you need to do? What has your pace been? Perhaps what areas have you identified as good practice that you want to share with others? What have been the challenges? What have been the barriers? What do you want to learn from others that perhaps you think have maybe led the way in certain aspects? And if we just move on to the next slide. So you'll see in this part, there are 10 questions in all, but it is really to dig deep so that we have a clear understanding of all the good things that you're doing to understand those challenges better. And again, that will assist the Commissioner in providing more advice and guidance further down the line. So what we'll move on to now, the next slide, please, are practical next steps. This isn't the only opportunity that you get to quiz us and hopefully help us to explain the tool better. We will be doing another webinar on the 28th of November, and Helen is kindly hosting a workshop at Data Cymru's National Intelligence event, and that's next week on the 22nd. So really, between the next two events, have a think about what is it we haven't told you about today that you really need to know. You're going to have a little bit of extra time to really get to grips with the guidance notes and the tools that we've already sent out to you. So we would imagine that the next two events will probably be a much more interactive dialogue, and there is an opportunity today for some questions, so things that immediately spring to mind, but there will be an opportunity. So I would encourage you in the meantime to please feed in the questions so that we have some time to prepare and provide you with the information that you need. So after the webinar on the 28th of November, you will have another couple of weeks to fully complete within your organisations the templates, and they are to be submitted to me by the 14th of December. My email address is there, and it's within the guidance notes. And any questions on the work of the Commissioner, please send across to Helen. And if we move on to the next slide. So just to give you a bit more information about the next phases of the project, once these have been submitted to us, we will do a review of the submissions as well as the evidence that you have provided to us. So that will be by the independent team alongside working in conjunction with the Future Generations Commissioner. And then what we will do, based on the information that we have received, we're going to establish the groupings of public bodies. And what we really want these to be are collaborative learning partnerships. So it's about really sharing best practice. It's about using one another to discuss those challenges and barriers that you've faced. It's really a learning process, and also to reflect on how you've found using the tool itself, so that can give us some feedback. As Bruce had mentioned, this is developmental. We do want to refine this, so this will be an iterative process for us as well. We would expect those collaborative learning meetings to happen in January and February, and we will be in touch with who you're going to be partnered with and the practical arrangements. And then we, as the independent team, will provide final report to the Commissioner. The work is expected to conclude by June of next year. So I know that I'm very excited to be part of this project, and we're as an independent team, we're trying to embrace the 5 ways of working too. So we really want to work with you, and for us, your feedback is really vital and important. So I think that's over to questions now.
Yeah. So diolch yn fawr, Cathy, Bruce. Thank you very much for taking us through the tool. What I should have said earlier, folks, as well, is when you're sending in questions, it's guaranteed anonymity. I'm not going to say who you are, so please do keep sending them in. We've had a couple already that I'm going to pose to the team now. But like I said earlier, if you do have questions, either use the Google Hangouts if you're able to log into that on your screens, or email me, heledd.morgan@futuregenerations.wales. And if we can't get round to answering all the questions in the 20-odd minutes we've got left, I'll do my best, and Cathy too, to answer your questions over the next few days. So the first question then to both of you that's come through is around the sort of evidence that you're looking for within the tool. People are interested in what sort of evidence they can provide you with and what kind of format they can send that through in.
Annual reports would be an initial obvious source. But as I mentioned, even something as simple as case studies that have gone out in an internal briefing, or perhaps you've done some other impact analysis within your corporate processes. What we would say is it does need to be documented evidence, so it has to already be in existence. A simple attachment to the tool or a web link. We want to make this as easy as possible. You do not have to cut and paste reams and reams of information. Direct us to a page number, a paragraph number in whatever specific document it is, and that's sufficient. Bruce, is there anything you'd like to add?
I would just add as well, I think we've kind of reiterated that we're not expecting you to create new material, but there may be things that you think, oh, that was a really good piece of work, that's a really good piece of evidence, but actually we haven't documented any of that anywhere. What we need you to do then is to reflect on that and why that might be, so that in future years you're thinking about how do we make sure we capture everything across the organisation and put it into our corporate reporting. That's one of the purposes of what we're trying to achieve here. And then just mention that in section 3. What we don't want to do is to generate a whole new industry for you in creating new documentation, because it's not necessary this year.
Okay. Another question we've had is around timescales, which I think we were expecting. The timescales are quite tight for this piece of work. So a question we've had is that, if we're asking you as public bodies to really think about how you fill this tool in and work with other people, the timescales of the 14th of December could be a little bit tight, and what sort of flexibility is there on timescales? I know what I would answer, but it is a tight timescale we're asking people to do. Is there anything you'd like to say, Kathy?
We recognise it's a tight timescale, and I suppose that would be if public bodies are having a real challenge in meeting that, then that's a conversation we need to have with the Commissioner. We recognise that this is the first time we're all doing this. It's new. New isn't always easy, far from it sometimes. But what we want is to get the best information that we can from public bodies. We want you to also gain from this experience and this process. So I think it would be probably back to the Commissioner.
And Kathy's quite right. We'd have to look at that because part of the reason we set this timescale is so that we can get those collaborative learning groups together in the new year to give us plenty of time to feed back to you individually about what we've learned and how we might be able to advise and assist along the way. So you've got that real-time relationship with us as the independent research team and as the Commissioner's office. But also because we all know that's what the question's about logistically, getting people together, especially in the winter months across Wales, can be a bit of a nightmare. So the quicker you're able to get the information to us, and as Kathy and Bruce have said, links, page numbers, directions to other pieces of work are fine. The more we're able to look at that kind of evidence and see who you're going to be best matched with in order to kind of learn collaboratively in the new year. Is there anything you'd like to add, Bruce, to that?
No, I would just say I think the message is quality rather than quantity, which is why we've tried to give you the guide on, how much time you might need to spend. We've all worked in corporate organisations. We know it's pressured. We're trying to make it as simple and as straightforward as we can.
And something I guess I would add to that is that something I said at the start was around the Commissioner's expectations of this year. We're not looking for a justification of how you're implementing the Act, therefore not looking for reams and reams of information. We know that you're all trying really hard out there. What we're looking for is what's really happening on the ground, your reflection on progress, and also your reflection on how you're using the 5 ways of working to make that progress, and anything else you want to tell us, of course. So, okay, we've had another question, which is about the kind of assessments and work with the Wales Audit Office that is currently going on, particularly in local government, and kind of how people can make best use of the evidence that they already have. So we might have partly answered that in the first question, but is there anything you want to add about, organisations do a lot of assessments already? Can this be incorporated?
I think so. I think that that existing work would be useful. And I suppose it is about reflecting on all the existing processes and assessments you already do and how that fits within the Act. So, because that in itself is about integration. So I think that would be beneficial and highly relevant.
Yeah, and something we kind of glossed over at the beginning was the conversations we've been having with other regulators, other organisations that seek information from public bodies. And I guess that's the start of our thinking around this first year. This is an exploratory and iterative process. So we are really interested, as Kathy's just said, if this clashes up against something you already do or something you're planning to do, this year. Perhaps it is going to be a bit painful for us all. I hope not, but perhaps. But we want to build on that and look at ways to improve that over the coming years as a Commissioner's Office, and working with others like Welsh Government and Wales Audit Office too.
I think that's a really crucial point. I think what I was always keen to underpin this work with was that understanding of very often, your organisations are scrutinised externally and you don't necessarily always get across exactly what you want to get across, and that's what we're trying to build into the tool. So really you being able to tell your own story rather than what somebody else might interpret that story to be. But we also know that the regulators and the regulatory framework that people are working within is complex. And if that complexity actually hinders you from demonstrating progress, then we need to understand that, because one of the functions of the Act can be, and the Commissioner's Office is to challenge some of that back into the system. So we kind of need all of that feedback in. But if you've already got assessments that other bodies have undertaken with you, then just reference them. You don't need to repeat them. That's a key message from us.
Thanks, Bruce. Had a really good question now about kind of use of the tool, about how do you give one score to one objective, which might be made up of several different steps, which you're kind of advancing the objective at a different rate. You're taking steps at different times. And the person's posed the same question to the 7 areas for change. How do you give them one score when maybe an organisation is charging ahead in one area of change, but finding it difficult in other areas of change? So what would you say about that, Kathy? How do you sort of score when you might be moving at different rates towards meeting an objective?
Yeah, I suppose that is going to be a challenge. And is it a case, I think it's for each organisation to take a call on that. And I think that's where then we move to the collaborative learning partnerships, because within that, organisations will be able to challenge one another and ask for rationale, and no doubt what we'll see in some areas are elevated scores, whereas others have been a bit more hard on themselves. And I suppose it's about how people feel, so if people feel that they have made real transformational change across 1 or 2 corporate areas, but feel that they haven't even made a start on another 1 or 2 and are somewhere in the middle with the rest, is that good evidence and embedded practice, because that they've made real transformational change, so they know how to get the others up to speed? Or is that just a midway point that it's good progress, it's developing, but there's more to do? That's one of the things of the first year of using this, and that's one of the things that we'll be picking up in the learning and the experience of public bodies in using this. and one of the areas of refinement of the tool. But it's an excellent question.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, anything to add? And can I ask as well? We've had a couple of comments that because you're furthest away from the microphone, people can't hear you as well as
I'm
me
sorry.
and Kathy. So
Okay.
give it a shout.
Apologies, everybody. Hopefully, I haven't said anything too important that you've missed. So I would say what we are looking for is progress against the objective as a whole in terms of how you score that. So recognising that you might be doing different steps at different rates, actually you should still be able to give an overview of what the score is for the objective as a whole. So that's what I would say, and on a balance of judgment, if you like, across the different things that you're doing. So if you're doing one step really fast, but that has got, is like 90% of the objective, then then you score it that way. If you're doing one step that is actually really good, but is actually a small part of transformation for your organisation, then you would maybe score that, the balance of scores, slightly lower. So I think it's just use your own judgment about that and explain what you've done.
Yeah, and section 3 should give you enough scope to get the rationale and explanations in there.
Mm-hmm. And also section 3 highlight any sort of good practice that you think that you have, or also highlight any kind of barriers that you're finding to taking those steps or to making change within those 7 areas of corporate change as well. But it's a very good question, because practically I know it'd be something that I'd be thinking about if I was about to fill this in. And I think section 1, which asks you to think about where you are on the journey, as Bruce has said, really think about what success looks like for that objective. The objectives are high level, but does the organisation have a view of when you'll meet that objective? What will it look like? What's the future going to look like? And if the steps aren't getting you there quickly, we'd really like to know about that, because that's a finding in itself for you. Are they the right steps that you're taking? Okay, another question, which is an interesting one too, which I'll kind of bunch them. I'll bunch 2 questions together, I guess. One is this for individual organisations rather than public services boards? And the other question that we've received is, on that note, are Welsh Government going to be filling in this tool as well?
In short, yes and yes. So yes, this is for individual organisations, public bodies, not the PSBs. And yes, it is also for Welsh Government as one of the 44 public bodies covered under the Act. And we recognise that potentially will be a mammoth task, but we want to collect the evidence from Welsh Government too. And I think it was one of the initial questions that we had, wasn't it?
Yes.
Discussions, yes. So
yeah. Anything to add, Bruce?
No, I think we're very clear on that.
Yes. And the person, in fairness, has asked, is there a plan in future to apply the same sort of methodology to PSBs? And the answer is not currently. The Commissioner's duty is quite interesting, which is something we reflected on in Wellbeing in Wales, the journey so far, the report that came out in May, in that we have powers and duties to advise public services boards and work quite closely with public services boards as the kind of collaborative vehicle for implementing the Act. We don't have the same sort of duty to monitor and assess the extent to which they're meeting their wellbeing objectives. That only applies to individual public bodies. So at the moment, as Kathy said, the focus is on public bodies, but down the line, who knows? Not yet, anyway. So another question we've had is about the kind of sign-off of the tool, which I appreciate Bruce said earlier, every organisation filling this in is going to be slightly different. The people who might be filling it in are going to be slightly different. How you go about filling it in. And I must say, personally, this makes me think back to when the Wales Audit Office issued their Year 1 commentaries, and I know they had similar questions. Who should fill this in? How on earth are we going to get this signed off? How honest should we be? How reflective should we be? And really, we recognise that every organisational culture is going to be different. We can advise whatever we like today, and I've got views. I'm sure Sophie's got views, and the team have got views about how best this would be filled in the timescales we've allowed. But really, you know, if I'm embodying Sophie, I'd say keep it as simple as possible. We are really trying not to overburden your organisations. If you are able, you know, to have this signed off, and for you as lead responsibility, nominated contacts, then I think that would be the simplest approach. But we recognise that this could cause some complexity, and we're on the end of the phone if you want to kind of discuss that in more detail. Bruce, Kathy, anything to say?
I think it's worth just reiterating what the end point as well is. So we have been commissioned as the independent team working on this to report on a collective basis across all 44 public bodies. So there won't be any kind of public document or commentary around individuals' self-assessment or self-reflection documents and their progress.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you need to have some reassurance that it is it's an internal tool for yourselves, a self-reflection tool, and the way we will use that after the workshops in January and February, which are to some degree are about moderation as well, so that we've got some consistency in how we understand progress is being made. But the actual reporting is going to be on a collective basis, maybe with some reflection on different sectors, because different sectors may present us with different issues. So that may help you think about how how and where you need to get the document signed off. But I wouldn't expect it, for example, to be going to organisational boards, particularly because it's going to be a lot of reference material to other documents. It doesn't feel like a document that you at this stage that you would need to take through that process. But you'll have your own governance processes, I think through where it's most appropriate for that to go, whether it's the lead director has sign off or whether you need to go through any formal committee. I think we would leave that to you.
I think you both have covered that.
Yeah, and just on that, really, I said at the start of the webinar about a little bit about the Commissioner's expectations in this first year, and this is not a tool for us to mark your homework with. It's more a tool for us to understand what's really happening on the ground, and for you to sort of reflect, hence self-reflection tool, on how this first year of meeting your objectives has gone. As I said earlier, there are 345 objectives being set across Wales, and they're very different in many cases. There aren't even similarities across sectors. So there isn't even similarities all in local government or all in health or all in the national bodies. Just really rich information, and you know it best is what we're trying to get at. So it would be fantastic to hear from you yourselves in an honest and reflective way about that. So we've had quite a practical question through now, which is, would you like the information back bilingually? Bruce is learning Welsh, so that could be a challenge.
I think that's back to you policy-wise.
Yes, so I mean, in terms of having it back in English and in Welsh, no, please answer in the language that you're most comfortable in. So we've circulated the tool and the letter in both languages, in English and Welsh. So if you'd like to fill it in Welsh, great. If you'd like to fill it in English, great. It's not a problem for us. Either language is fine. Then I guess building on what we were just discussing, what feedback will public bodies receive? Will it be individual and tailored to the public bodies, or will it be a generic report? And I think this is going to have to be our last question because we're swiftly running out of time. So Kathy, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first part of the feedback is actually within those collaborative learning partnerships where you'll get the opportunity to discuss. The end report is due in June, but what we're hoping to do is look at individual public bodies. So we would be envisaging maybe a small amount of feedback, but what we're interested in as well is kind of the collective So it's a bit of a mixture, really,
Mm.
what we're expecting.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, would you like to say anything?
No, I think Kathy's covered that.
Mm-hmm. So just to summarise then, what we're envisaging at the moment is self-reflection tool itself will be a product for you. As Bruce said earlier, we're not going to make the individual self-reflection tools public. You're filling them in for your own self-reflection, but also to inform us of where you feel you are, and we'll use those then to match you with other public bodies. We're going to have fun doing that, I'm sure, which, you know, may be kind of feeling like they're stronger in one section where you feel you're weaker, or maybe you're on a par, and getting those conversations to happen in the new year. There might be a small amount of written feedback to you individually, privately, as an individual public body from that, but we're still working out what that might look like. And that was actually going to be one of the questions I ask at the workshop at the Data Cymru event next week, is what sort of feedback do people want? So if you have any more thoughts on that, perhaps we can cover in the next webinar, albeit that, you know, we're a small team working on this. And then there's going to be an overall report in June of next year that the team will work on with our team as well. Okay, so I think we're out of time. But thank you so much to you all listening for those questions, some really excellent questions coming through, and keep them coming to me as well. My email address and my telephone numbers are in the self-reflection tool that you should have already received. And I think I know many of you on the other end of the line as well. And we'll be in touch, I guess. Thank you so much, everybody. Diolch yn fawr iawn.